this whole shebang is sort of powerful ideas. Most of us here at the Kennedy School are both researchers and teachers. And I think sometimes we kid ourselves about the power of our ideas as researchers. I, about a year ago, published my 12th book. And with that book, like all the others, a part of me kind of thought that they'd ship it from the publishers, and humanity would arise as one and say, "Thank you for explaining it to us. We'll now sort of carry on with our lives in a better informed and more orderly manner." And that didn't happen then, and it never happens, and it kind of never does happen in the way we expect, because this species has been around for a long time, and we've been dealing with collective problems for a long time. And any idea that you come up with that's totally new is likely to be either wrong or small bore. So yeah, we do make some progress, and I'm proud of the research I do, and I'm proud of the research we do as an institution. But I think we do tend to overestimate the impact of our research. Conversely, I think we tend to underestimate our impact as teachers. I think we tend to underestimate the power of ideas when they get into the heads and the hands and the hearts of our amazing students when they become our amazing alumni. And this session is about that piece of the power of the Kennedy School. And I think that this is the session where we're, I think, a little honest about the relative importance of our teaching and research. So congratulations again on choosing the right session. We've got here 4 alumni who are wildly diverse in the program that they graduated from, in the sector where they work, in the stages of their career, and other dimensions. But they're united in that we're really proud of them. And we think and hope that on balance, they're proud of the contribution that we made to the work they do. Each of them is going to share a few thoughts on how their Kennedy School training has proven powerful in their lives and their work. And then we'll have some open discussion, and we're going to end with a very short video about the latest innovations in teaching and learning at the Kennedy School. I don't know what these folks are going to say. I really don't. So I hope it ends up being, again, on balance, nice about the Kennedy School. I'm going to introduce them all at once, and then they're going to, in alphabetical order, say a few things, and we'll have some open discussion. So in alphabetical order, immediately to my left, Kahlil Byrd, a mid-career MPA from 2003, who is currently the Chief Investment Officer of the Fund for the Republic, a nonprofit committed to reducing the role of money in American politics. To my immediate right, Sarah Dillard, MPP MBA 2011, the CEO of SPD Advisory, and more generally, she's been a player in U.S. education policy from a range of organizational approaches. To Sarah's right, Molly Kinder, MPA AD 2008, currently a consultant at the Center for Global Development, which is just the latest in a dazzling array of economic development roles she's had across sectors and across continents. And then to my far left, Joseph Tompkins, Jr., MPP JD 1975. Joe is a partner in Sidley, Austin, and has a career of distinguished federal service as well as a quite remarkable legal career. So, Kahlil, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, John. And you want us to talk for about 2 minutes, right? 3 to 5.
Inflation adjusted.
And first of all, thank you everyone for joining, and all of the folks who are on the panel. This is always a special opportunity, and I'm really glad to be back here at a time when the Kennedy School is finding itself with unique success, and that would be in fundraising. It's just something that feels new, and it brings a new energy to the whole gathering. The ideas have always been here. So I graduated in 2003, and I think what I'm supposed to do is culminate with the game-changing event. So I'll lay that out at the end, and you can evaluate it and let me know after if you thought that was rich enough for this conversation. But let me talk a little bit about the journey. I call myself, have named myself a political entrepreneur. And there are people who have been working in politics for a long time, and they work for candidates and they work for the parties and et cetera. And I'm a conservative and a Republican. But I have been much more fascinated with the idea of taking issues and ideas and moving them into the public space in large organizational settings. When I was here at the Kennedy School, I focused heavily on social entrepreneurship, which was a well-developed field that I was trying to express in my own leadership. The journey that I made and why the Kennedy School has been important to me as I've gone and run now the third major, or what we hope to think is a major organization in political reform, was I was a jobs person before I got here. I had a great life in public broadcasting as a producer. I worked for NPR and the BBC. And I came here with a very fuzzy and interesting notion that I could take the things that I had learned about international media and I could project them into both the media and development world on the African continent. Me, who had only traveled to Africa once, me, who was born in Boston and grew up in DC, who knows a few Africanists, but I assure you I had no training beyond the media part. For me, the case studies that we did here at the Kennedy School, where we were analyzing and dissecting very large-scale challenges, whether it be Aung San Suu Kyi or Mandela, or when I would go over to the business school and you would look at the journey of an MTV International and how they were expressing themselves. In so many ways, gave me the courage to think about myself as a sector leader in what I consider now political entrepreneurship. The transformation for me from a jobs person expressed itself in that I launched the first organization I had ever launched coming out of the Kennedy School. And I learned the hard lesson that all those first-time entrepreneurs learn, and that is don't create a $100 million idea with $10 million. That was one of my big lessons. But then I kind of hit my stride. I did a campaign with Deval Patrick. I was the only Republican working on his campaign, and I was the communications director. And I learned politics from the sector that I understood, and came upon a group, and particularly a couple of people who had decided that they wanted to create a third pathway for someone to run for president. This organization, which became Americans Elect, and was created in 2009 and expressed itself in the 2012 campaign, which was all about giving Americans more choice on the presidential ballot, ended up being a $40 million organization, 8,000 people working for it. 3,000 of those people were volunteers. And so the case studies that I had absorbed while I was at the Kennedy School gave me the strength and understanding of how to move forward. I went on to run an organization called Students First. I was the president of that organization that was created by Michelle Reed. What I discovered in my journey in guiding Americans Elect for about 4 years was that I was going to do my 10,000 hours and become a really good operator in this space of politics and issue reform. I was going to be a guy who could be the CEO or the president and kind of make the whole thing work, working collaboratively with the strategists, the communicators, the grassroots organizers, the campaigners, the funders, and that was a skill that was very valuable, is very valuable as we try to make change in our society. My current organization, described very well and very shortly, I'm Chief Investment Officer of a 2-year-old organization that is making catalytic investments in the money and politics reform space. Why? Now that I've operated a couple of organizations, one in which you would think of as the electoral reform space, another in the education reform space, at least one side of it, you need to have someone and you need to have people who understand how to invest well in those who are coming behind us. And I've seen my friends make this particular journey in the private sector as they join venture funds. And so I have become an impact investor in this particular space. It's not easy. It's not easy to choose between one idea and the other. But at a time when people are extraordinarily upset about the leadership that they have in Washington, someone in some group and community of people have to be trying to break the logjam in terms of the way our campaigns are financed and a lot of other things that most people don't pay attention to every day. So that journey from a person who was a jobs guy to a person who has the confidence to lead organizations, and at this point has raised, I'd say, $100 million for the ideas of political reform, was embedded for me in the case studies that we absorbed here at Kennedy School. So what changed the game for me? Well, it was taking a class which was different from any that I had taken with Roger Porter, where we spent the whole semester analyzing the budget and understanding that even though people talked about the military budget like this, that it was actually this relative to healthcare and other entitlements, etc. And at the end of that class, he read a speech. It took him about 12 minutes to read it, called The Inner Ring. And The Inner Ring is a speech that was given by C.S. Lewis, probably about the 50s. He had been asked by a private school to come and give wisdom to these young men, probably, who were going into the world. And what he said to them was, you're always going to be asked to join the group, the clique, the organization, and the effort that makes you feel comfortable. And once you get into the inner ring, you're going to do things to compromise yourself, to stay there. You'll shade a little bit, you won't push as hard because you'll be so desperate to stay on the inside. As a political entrepreneur, as a performer, and as somebody who runs organizations in this space, reading that recitation, which is probably about the end of my time here at the Kennedy School, where I had done about everything that one could do here wonderfully, gave me the confidence and understanding that I had to be a person who gathered a new group of people, that I didn't have to join the regular group of people or people who were doing something very established, that it was our time to make change in new formats and new forms.
Kahlil, thank you. Sarah.
How many of you were at the forum yesterday with Presidents Kahlil and Sidley? All right, that's almost everyone. It was inspiring, right? I want to follow up on something that they both talked about yesterday. One of the themes that I heard loud and clear yesterday was, and then the plan changed. And so, they both got elected and conditions changed. They ended up taking on issues that they hadn't anticipated taking on. Their priorities shifted. They had new things they had to deal with. So as Jack alluded to, I've spent most of my career in education, and most people would describe it that way. I worked at the U.S. Department of Education, where among other things, I worked on the plan for transforming the New Orleans public school system after the hurricane, launching Doing What Works, our best practices initiative, as well as being a staff member of the Secretary's Policy Committee, so just in general working on education policy. I left that to start the National Math and Science Initiative with my boss from the Department of Education. The National Math and Science Initiative scales up programs proven to have a positive impact on math and science education. One of our programs is around AP Math and Science education, and the average school we work with sees growth of more than 85% in the first year in students taking and passing AP Math and Science exams. Those students are disproportionately minority students and female students. And then came back to grad school, did a lot of awesome things I'll talk about in a few minutes, and since then have worked on several other education things. I've worked on the Memphis school district merger, which is the largest school district merger in U.S. history. Absolutely fascinating, super undercovered because Memphis is in the middle of the country, so it's hard to kind of find out and read about the work and the political climate there. And then more recently have been working at education startups, one that partners with community colleges to create honors programs, and another that works on competency-based learning platforms. And so when people kind of hear that version of the bio, it just sounds like education, education, education. You're somebody who's really passionate about education. And I am. But another way of kind of describing that narrative would be, and then the plan changed, or chaos. What I have found kind of over and over is both the situations I've found myself in, whether it was on my 5th day of work as a 24-year-old going down to New Orleans 9 days after the hurricane, or in a merger situation where it had been to court several times, the two districts weren't getting along, weren't cooperating, and having to come together to merge as a school district. Everything has been in flux in a lot of the situations in which I've found myself. And I think that creates enormous opportunity, because when there has been a change, whether it's because of a natural disaster or a political change or the pace of a merger and acquisition, then you have opportunities to do things that you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to do. But you have to be prepared to do them. And I think that that's a lot of what I got out of my time here at the Kennedy School, was better preparation for those uncertain situations. So there's 5 skills in particular that I feel like I really honed while I was here in school, and I just want to touch on each of them briefly. The first is the ability to reason from first principles and understand the motivations of others. And so you have to use your brain when there is a chaotic situation because it's novel. You can't just do what you've been doing, or you can try, but that's a certain recipe for failure. And so, some of the most important classes I took here were with people who pushed me to think more carefully. People who pushed me to think about what incentives are people facing? Why are they behaving that way? Do they actually mean what they say? How can you tell? And what are my own cognitive biases that I'm bringing to this situation? This push in my thinking is so embedded into who I am that it's actually hard to pull apart and come up with examples of when I've used it, because I use it all the time. I use it, at the airport when I'm standing in line to check my bag and wondering if wait time is going to go to infinity because people are arriving at random intervals and the person at the desk is unable to actually accommodate the growing queue. And I use it when I talk to people about career advice, and they have kind of 2 options, and one's more safe and secure, and one is more risky. And I talk about contingent options, right? And if you have the ability to go back to that, kind of slightly more likely to pay off, but less high of a payoff activity, if you have that option to return to that state, your life is going to be so much richer if you take the chance and do the thing that's more risky, that's more likely not to pay off at all, but if it does, to pay off higher. And those are all things that I got from I would say really a trio of classes here at the Kennedy School, but most principally from Richard Zackhauser, who teaches a wonderful class called Analytic Frameworks. And what's so great about how he frames his class is that it's he, rather than saying, here's a tool, how do you apply it? He says, here's a problem, solve it however you want. And you're in groups with other students, and some students have backgrounds in computer science. I did not. Some students have great backgrounds in mathematical problem solving. I did not. And some students have some facility with Excel, which I had. And it was just such a wonderful experience to work on solving these complicated problems with other people who could do it differently and do it better, and taught me new ways and new approaches to them. The second skill I would say is really important is content knowledge. And this is one that people tend to go back and forth on, right? I've definitely worked with people who say anything can be learned. You don't actually need content knowledge. You can always pick it up later. You can pick it up on the job. I'd actually argue that in a chaotic situation, you do not have time to pick up content knowledge on the job. You need to know the basics. And what's great about spending time and investing in coming back to school is you not only have content knowledge about your area of domain expertise, you have content knowledge about other domain areas. And so you're able to put things together that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to put together. So an example of that for me is one of the things that kind of comes up when you're talking about kind of redesign of a school system is how are you going to finance schools? And in particular, how are you going to finance charter schools? And there's a lot of variables that are much discussed in what the per pupil allocation should be for a charter school versus a district school. But one that kind of really isn't talked about much in the literature, but was able to identify because of a course I took here at the Kennedy School, is demand risk. And a charter school actually faces much less demand risk than a district school. A charter school is able to manage their utilization to 100%. They can actually fill every seat. A district can't do that because they have to educate students wherever they show up, and all of them. They can't say, sorry, we're full. And demand risk, I knew from taking infrastructure finance, is actually the highest compensated form of risk in infrastructure. And that's because it's very hard to lay off. You can't just kind of give it to somebody else the way you can with construction risk, where if you hire a construction firm, they're more capable of doing it than maybe you were yourself. And so you're able to kind of shift some risk and lower the price. With demand, that's just not the case. And so it was able to kind of bring in this additional element of discussion that I wouldn't have been able to do had I not taken an infrastructure finance course here at the Kennedy School. The third skill is self-expression. So in a setting of chaos, it rewards people who are able to express themselves both in being put on the spot verbally as well as in quick writing. And I think there were a couple of classes here that really facilitated those skills for me. One was Nick Burns' diplomacy class. He, we were put into groups, and there was like a briefing each class. He would pull a number out of an envelope, and if he pulled out the number of your group, you guys had to come down and present. He did this in a true random fashion, which meant that there was a chance you could be pulled every week. And my group was in fact pulled 3 times, while some other groups hadn't been pulled at all yet. And we were pulled 2 classes in a row. But just like having somebody kind of force you to be able to come down and be put on the spot, and put on the spot with a group of people, not just individually as I had been previously in my career, was definitely a skill building experience for me. The second is really around writing, and I think there's 2 different formats that writing has been really valuable for in my career, and one is the ability to write a quick memo. And doing that every week for Graham Allison and Megan O'Sullivan in their national security course really made it something that I can just do. And I can consistently do it, and I can do it quickly, and I don't feel at all intimidated by it. I know the components that should be in it. And then the other was actually more of a surprise to me, which is I took a writing course here at the Kennedy School. I love to write, but I've always been a slow writer. And what I would say about this course is it really created a habit of writing for me. And writing is the thing that I now come back to when I'm in between my chaotic education situations. And it's something that allows me to sort through my thoughts and ideas, to develop new ones, and then have material to draw on when I come back to it. I think that the last 2 I would just mention quickly are the ability to run process. And I think that the ability to run process is something that to date, I don't know of a school that teaches well. But I think that the ability to run process is something that kind of, where combined with my interest in writing, is actually a direction in which I'm taking my career. So I've been kind of spending about half of my time actually working on a manuscript about running process and how do you run process. I think there's kind of a lot that's been written about leadership, a lot that's been written about individual productivity, but there's this huge gulf in the middle, which is like, what do you actually do at work? How do you structure your week? How do you kind of make sure you have a communication architecture set up to facilitate your objectives that you want to accomplish? And I wouldn't have the ability to do that had I not taken that writing course and kind of developed the discipline and habit around writing. And then the final skill, just to mention it quickly, is managing your own psychology. And that's something that I did not invest nearly enough in here at the Kennedy School, but some of my classmates did, taking classes with Heifetz and Gantz and Bill George. And it's something that I'm now going back and investing a lot of my time in order to grow in my career. And so what I would say is if you don't have these skills and you find yourself in a crisis, you can end up feeling like a victim. But whether you'll be a victim of a game that changed or whether you'll be a game changer, like President Sirleaf and Calderon, depends on the tools you have. And that's what the Kennedy School prepares its students for.
Thank you, Sarah. Molly Kinder.
Great, thank you so much, Jack. Before I begin, I'm curious, is anyone here a graduate of the MPAID program, International Development Program?
You're currently doing it.
Oh, excellent. Okay, great. So you'll be my truth teller in case I say anything. I was a 2008 alum of the MPID program, and for those who aren't familiar with this degree program, it's an international development sequence that is heavily quantitative. So it's really trying to give. The theory was there were a lot of students applying to PhD programs in economics who really wanted to be leaders and practical, not the academics. So they designed a 2-year master's program that was supposed to give that type of skill set, very rigorous economic skills, but to people who wanted to be practical leaders in the space. So when I think back to my Kennedy School experience, I think if you polled alums of the MPID program, probably the one thing they all would most remember is a mantra that we heard over and over from our professor, Lamp Pritchett, which was, what is effective policy design? And there are 3 things that are in that. You must be technically correct, administratively feasible, and politically supportable. And when I think about my Kennedy School experience, I had amazing exposure to all 3. And I use these all the time in my job. On the administratively feasible, since I know so many of you were at the President Sirleaf talk yesterday, I had the great privilege of leading the first group of Kennedy School students who interned in her government the summer between my 2 years. So I interned for her finance minister, who's now the head of the Africa department at the IMF. Amazing woman. And it was an incredible experience to work right in President Sirleaf's government, to go to her cabinet meetings. I had lunch every day with her finance minister, and I really understood about what was administratively feasible, even in a very challenging environment like Liberia. On Politically Supportable, not only did I get the chance to get involved in the Obama campaign as it was kicking off next door in New Hampshire, but I swear by a program I did at the Women in Public Policy program. It was called From Harvard Square to the Oval Office, and there was about 30 of us, women from across Harvard graduate programs, who all have an interest in running for office one day. And it was a year-long program that trained us in campaigning, public speaking. We got anytime a prominent woman came to campus, we got to meet with her. Amazing program. So those were some of the things I got from my broader Kennedy School experience. But because I know where the instruction was, what did I learn in the classroom? And I wanted to talk about how my classroom experience has truly transformed my career. And that's not an exaggeration. So a major reason why I chose the MPID program was that first part of that trilogy, which was the technically correct. And my undergraduate training was in political science and peace studies. I didn't have any economics training at all, no quantitative training. And in my work experience before I came to the Kennedy School, I was surrounded by economists and I just didn't speak their language. And I remember I was working in India for the World Bank and Pakistan, and I spent some time in a rural village, and my mind kept coming to these big questions of why was there all this poverty in villages, and yet there was all this growth in Delhi, where I lived, and I just didn't feel like I had the tool set to unlock those questions. So I thought I should go to the MPID program. I really need to learn this very technical training in economics. What I had no idea was probably my most memorable class that I used all the time was the one that I would never have guessed I would say in this setting, which was my statistics and my econometrics course. I remember showing up to my statistics class. I had to take the front row seat because I think I was the only student in my entire program who'd never taken statistics. And Dan Levy was my professor. He is absolutely tremendous. He loves teaching. He really gets a great love of learning for his students. He takes a lot of pride in that. So I sat right in his front row. I knew I was probably the least prepared student in the class, so I thought, well, I'll just sit right in the front row, and I'll hang on every word. So I learned lots of fun things. Being 6'2", I learned I was about 2 standard deviations above the mean in height, which is a pretty fun thing to learn. We used me as outliers. I was the outlier in the class, which was a pretty fun thing to learn. Unfortunately, after my first midterm, I also realized I was 2 standard deviations below the mean on the test. And so Dan Levy called me to his office, and I said, Dan, there's 2 ways I can think of this. I know what 2 standard deviations below the mean is, and I should be proud that I've learned that in statistics, or I should be horrified that that was my score. And he said, well, I think you should be horrified. So I spent every Friday afternoon in this building getting tutored by a second-year student, and it was really, really hard for me to learn statistics. But light bulbs went off, and it was one of the most exciting things. It's sort of bimodal. It's before and after. Before I knew these concepts and after, and it just was so exciting that these light bulbs went off, and I finally mastered. And I will say, I never really thought I wanted to be average, but I would take great pride that on my final exam I was the mean. So that was very exciting. I was average, and I was very proud of that. And indeed, in my second semester, I took econometrics, and that's where these tools I learned. Then it really got very exciting because I learned how you can use statistical methods and experiments to actually be able to determine the causal impact of a program. And I would say that anyone who does the MPID program has a soft heart. We all really care about poverty. We all want to make a difference in the world. But it's really those classes that gave me that hard head, that made me understand if we really want to make a difference in the world, we have to understand what actually works, whether it's a health intervention or how do you get kids learning better in the classroom. There's actually statistical ways with experiments that you can run experiments and find out whether or not an intervention that you feel in your heart must work, you really know in your head whether or not it actually is making a difference. And that was extraordinary to me that I learned that tool set and that I was inspired in those classes to see how that has real world implications. The example they always used in that class to get us inspired was Progresa, or Oportunidades in Mexico, which was a conditional cash transfer program that the Mexican government randomly introduced across Mexico, and they were able to do an experiment to find out that this conditional cash transfer program had a very significant impact on student enrollment and on health outcomes. And because of that, they learned that this program really works, and it's been politically supported in Mexico and has been spread across the developing world. So anyway, so that tool set I learned at the Kennedy School. I never, ever would have been able to do anything in my career with that if it wasn't for the classroom instruction I got. And since I've left, I've done lots of different jobs, but I've directly applied that set of skills. So I was a real passion of mine to work in the Obama administration. In fact, it was my mission in life. And so I finally achieved that, and I joined the Obama administration, and I went to USAID to help start something called Development Innovation Ventures, or DIV. This is the brainchild of a Harvard economist who is really the father of this movement to rigorously evaluate whether or not a program works. And his name is Michael Kramer. And Michael Kramer had this idea of creating an innovation fund that has dedicated money, sort of like venture capital, how you might pilot something, give little bits of money to lots of future Facebooks, a little bit more money to test to see if it really works, and only really back with lots of money to go to scale when you know for sure something works. So he wanted to bring this approach to the way the US government does its foreign aid. Jeff Brown, who's also an MPID alum, is the first director of this program, and I was the first director of special programs. So my job is to help get this incubated in the administrator's office and grow to a real program. And what's really exciting is that DIV basically is open to anyone in the world. It's an amazing thing that the US government's development money is open to anybody to apply, either with a brand new, innovative new idea that's never been tested, or, interestingly, to provide stage 2 up to $1 million to rigorously test in that way I learned in the classroom here at the Kennedy School, to use academic experiments to rigorously find out whether or not an innovative new approach really works. So it's marrying innovation with evidence and real testing to see if it works. If something works at that level, we would be able to give up to $15 million to scale it to reach millions of people. And that was something I helped start in the Obama administration. And now I'm working in London. It was so successful that the UK government, David Cameron last year at the G8 announced that the UK government, the US government, a really amazing private philanthropy called the Omidyar Network, Pierre Omidyar is the eBay founder, they're joining, they're an impact investor, they're another partner. We're joining together to form a brand new organization in London based on this model that we started at USAID. So now I'm co-leading the startup of this new organization, and we have lots of other donors coming on board. And it's all really, truly, I would never have even been qualified or known to do this if it wasn't for my training. And I'll just say, I think the proof is in the pudding of my love for the Kennedy School, because I'm getting married in 2 weeks. My about-to-be husband is starting a mid-career program in July, and he's a police officer in the Metropolitan Police in London. He's in the special leadership track where they are given a master's degree. They don't have statistics in the master's degree. And I went crazy. I said, Jamie, you need statistics. You absolutely must have statistics. So, and I said, and you are Kennedy School through and through. So he is starting in July with math camp. He's going to really, unfortunately, have the same experience that I did, which is going to be very hard for him to learn this. But he's delighted on it. And just in case there's anyone in the room who is a funder to the Kennedy School, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I would not have been able to go to the Kennedy School without a scholarship that I got. And my fiance has a full ride as well for public service. So neither of us would have this experience if it wasn't for the generosity of people who, actually in both of our cases, were not alums of the Kennedy School, but believed in it. So thank you to anybody who gives to the school and for allowing people like us to do the work we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Molly.
Joe? First, it's a real honor to be on the panel. And it's a lot of these stories. So I'm not enough work.
Your mic's not working.
I turned it up.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I also want to say I set a rule for myself a long time ago, and that is that I would never talk about myself. And I pretty much stuck to that. When David Elwood invited me to be on his panel, I said, oh no, I'm going to have to talk about myself. So I guess I've agreed to do that. Yep. It's my story, and I'll try to keep this brief, and just by way of background, because I think it helps explain how I feel about this place. I grew up in a small town in southwest Virginia with about 5,000 people, and had 2 older brothers. My father was the co-owner of a hardware store. My mother was a teller at a bank. And the only way my father could make it is if my brothers and I worked at the hardware store. So starting at 8 years old, I started working at the hardware store. And great way to get to know people, learn more about nails and stuff that I never would have learned. But it really taught me a lesson. I mean, is in terms of what's important. So I had a good public school there and was able to do all right. And then I was fortunate to get admitted to Washington and Lee, which is a small liberal arts school in Lexington, Virginia. And the only way I could go was to get a full scholarship, which I did. So I went to W&L, majored in politics. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, so not knowing what I wanted to do, I decided to go to law school and applied and got in a number of places, including Harvard. So I was able to come up here again only because I got a full scholarship. So I figured I would probably go to law school for 3 years and then go back somewhere in Virginia and probably practice law in a law firm, maybe go into government at some point, but nothing more specific. So during my first year of law school, I was walking to class and on a bulletin board on the way to class had a handwritten note. It says, "Come to so-and-so classroom next Tuesday to hear about the joint degree program with the Kennedy School of Law School." I'd never heard of the Kennedy School. It was in its second year at that point, and I just didn't even know it existed. So I decided, that could be interesting, I'm going to go. So I went. At that point, there were 2 law students that were in the joint degree program, and that was it. And they started talking about the classes they were taking, the professors they were taking with Dick Neustadt, Tom Schelling, and I just said, that's what I want to do. So during my first year of law school, I applied. Fortunately, got in to the Kennedy School that summer. So that changed everything. So the second year, I went to the Kennedy School full-time. This building, by the way, was long in the future. We were at the old Littauer Center up next to the law school. And there were 24 of us total in the public policy program. That was it. 8 of us were joint law degree, 2 were joint medical school, 1 was joint education. And I think the others were just straight 2-year MPPs. And among my classmates, we spent every day in the same classroom, the 24 of us, which I'll never forget. And among my classmates was Larry Bacow, who some of you may know, who stayed on to get a PhD here and was president of Tufts University. He was here, he's here this weekend. I got to catch up with him last night. But other people had gone on to do great things. But just being able to sit in the classroom like that with Neustadt, Schelling, Francis Bator, Zach Hauser, Graham Allison had just published Essence of Decision. That was the first thing we read in the political analysis part. Graham had just gotten his PhD, I think. He was not even a full faculty member. Mark Moore was a teaching assistant. Yeah. Tells you how old I am. But just that collection of people in public policy, 240, I think it was called, was just amazing. And they said, our doors are open, come see us anytime you want, and they meant it. So we were able to spend quality time with each one of those people. And it was just a great experience. And to this day, I mean, Dick Neustadt was like a father to me. He was just like a mentor. And so was Tom Schelling and the others that I mentioned. So I did the public policy thing, and then we were supposed to, after that year, do something in government. And I worked for a law firm after my first year of law school, so I kind of looked around. And fortunately, I was able to get a job for the governor of Virginia at the time. His name was Linwood Holton, who was still one of my heroes, Republican. Was there during desegregation, passive resistance, and I still remember here at the law school, those of us from the South were kind of looked down on. You guys were bad. And getting the New York Times one day, and on the front cover was Linwood Holton walking his daughters to the bus stop to make sure that they went to desegregated schools, which was what the court had ordered. And I'll never forget that. Anyway, I worked for Governor Holton. He had just set up something called the Council on the Environment. And he decided there were all these different Virginia agencies that were that companies had to go to get permits to build things, State Water Control Board, some air control thing, and they would have to get multiple permits if they wanted to build something. And he said, I think we really should try to consolidate, these agencies so it's easier on businesses to do what they need to do. So that was my job, to figure out, to meet with each one of the agencies in Virginia that had some connection with getting permits in the environment, and figure out a way to put it all together. And fortunately, it worked. We were able to redo the regulatory scheme and all that, and consolidate things. So kind of toward the end of the summer, when things were kind of falling together, the head of the council, who was not a lawyer, I forgot his background, he said, "How did you learn how to do that?" And I said, "Do what?" He said, "Pull all this together and get people, and all these agencies to agree to do it." I said, "I don't know. It's just the way you do things." And it was a subconscious thing, but it was because of things that I'd learned here at the Kennedy School. And when I came back, I was telling one of the professors about it. He said, "Why don't you write a case study with that?" So I said, "Sure." So I wrote a case study with that. So I could go on and on. But then graduated. It was 1975. Wasn't sure what to do. I was interested in government, but I talked to Dick Neustadt. He said, "Look, it's the lame duck Ford administration. Nothing's going to happen next year. So why don't you go to a law firm and then think about going to government later?" So that's what I did. So I went to Sidley, Austin, where I am, 1975, and enjoyed what I was doing. And then in 1978, the Carter administration came in, and Phil Hyman, I meant to mention him a minute ago, he was part of the core faculty too, that started the program. He was appointed Assistant Attorney General in charge of the criminal division. And so Phil called me and said, "I want you to come work for me." And I said, "Phil, I don't do criminal law." He said, "I don't care. I want you to come work for me." And I said, "Well, what would I do?" He said, "I've got a new office that I just set up, Office of Policy Management Analysis, and I want you to be the deputy director of it. And there are 3 issues that I want that office to look at. You're the first person I'm talking to, so you get to pick." I said, "Okay, what are they?" He said, "White-collar crime, narcotics and dangerous drugs, and organized crime." I said, "I think I'll take white-collar crime." I don't want to look at my rearview mirror every time I'm driving. So again, it was Phil's idea that we needed, and white-collar crime was kind of a new term back then. This was 1979. It wasn't something that people were starting to use the term, but nobody was quite clear what it meant. So my job was to do a government-wide investigation or study, not just of the Department of Justice, but of all the investigative agencies involved in fraud, economic crime, corruption, all that kind of stuff. So FBI, Secret Service, Postal Inspection, the whole gamut, and also the inspectors general. So I did that, and had a younger person helping me. And the result was, I think it was August of 1980, we produced a report called Report of the Attorney General, National Priorities for the Investigation and Prosecution of White-Collar Crime. That's the first time the department had defined what it thought white-collar crime was. And what we found, and this is what Phil thought, in terms of how the investigative agencies and all the U.S. attorneys' offices were being, in the criminal division, were being evaluated, it was simply on a case count. I mean, at the end of each year, they'd be working on their budget for next year. And the question was, how many cases did you open this year or last year? How many did you close? And how many you're taking in? It was just pure numbers. And, I talked to Phil, and he said, "That can't be right." He said, "How do we measure the quality of the cases, not just the number of cases?" So in the course of doing the study and talking to people about, what they did, we came up with criteria for each, like program fraud, procurement fraud. We broke out different types of white-collar crime and said, these are the criteria that you, the investigators and prosecutors, should use in deciding which cases you're going to take on. And boy, talk about, a challenge. But we were able to do it, and we were able, and this is, again, the subconscious thing. I wasn't thinking, okay, I'll learn this in Public Policy 240. But in order to make this work, you had to get all the agencies to buy into it. So, you do the analysis, what are our objectives, who are the stakeholders, how are we going to get the stakeholders involved so that they will implement this once we decide what it is. And that's what we did. But I wasn't thinking in those terms, I was just doing it, because that's what I learned to do. And so at the end of it, we, implementation analysis, we're at Public Policy 240, how are we going to implement this when we do it? So we had an elaborate implementation plan on how to get 95 U.S. attorneys' offices across the country to implement what we had done. And it worked. And people, career types at the Justice Department, they were just kind of watching. They said, "Where did you learn how to do that?" I said, "That's just the way you do things." And again, it's just a subconscious use of what I've learned here at Kennedy School. Anyway, I can go on. Phil left, and I was appointed Deputy Chief of the Fraud Section, learned more about prosecuting white-collar crime. And I went back to my firm in 1982, and I've been there ever since. I started our white-collar crime practice. It's one of the largest practices we have. And I never would be in the position I'm in today if I had not come to the Kennedy School for that reason and other reasons. And the other thing I want to make, and I was interested, Kahlil pointed this out, I think the most effective teaching method while I was here was a case study method. We had case studies for everything and all policy classes. So I wanted to be involved with the Kennedy School, so when Joe and I started the Dean's Alumni Leadership Council, I joined that. We'll come up here a couple times a year. In fact, we were in this room when Joe and I was giving a report, 2003 maybe. And I and others I knew were here. And so at some point, I asked the question, I said, Dean, how is the case writing program? He just kind of slumped. He said, not well. He said, it's really deteriorated. He said, we just don't have the resources we used to have to write cases. He said, I'm really sorry to report that. So that really kind of hit me. And then Dean Elwood came on board, and I'd asked the same question. It was the same answer later. Then the school did a survey of its alumni. It was like 2008 or 9, I think. And one of the Litauer Society, or it's called some Dean's Alumni Leadership Council meeting, they had a PowerPoint showing the results of that survey. And one of the questions they asked the alumni, what was the most effective teaching methodology when you were at the Kennedy School? Case study. Lectures way down here. Class discussion. That was one slide. 2 slides later, it had things that output of the case writing program. In the 1980s, I guess, it was like 80-some cases a year. In the 1990s, it was down to 40-some, and then in the 2000 period, it was down to 16 a year. And I said, that just doesn't make any sense, the juxtaposition of those two. So anyway, I decided I wanted to do something to work on that, so I have. But I made a gift to the school 3 years ago to get the case writing program going again. And thanks to Jack, Carolyn, and others, it's really back where it should be. So anyway, I'll stop at that, but I think that gives you some sense of the effect that Kennedy School's had on my life.
Thank you, Joe. Could we get the video ready, please? When we get it right, what happens in the Kennedy School classroom can equip these folks and others like them to change the game. And we're trying to change our game in terms of what happens in the Kennedy School classroom. And there are 3 things coming together. One is the need, recognition that we have got to do what we do really, really well. Another is breakthroughs in cognitive science that let us think differently about teaching and learning. And the third component, I think, is help from our friends. And I think it's appropriate we end with Joe. Joe, at his own initiative, helped us restart the CASE program, helped us raise our game in a key part of active learning. He's modest, so he didn't actually get into details. But I will say, as of last night, his support for the CASE program got into 7 figures. And it's a huge game changer for us. 3-minute video by my colleague, Patricia Garcia-Rios, on a few of the things that are changing in Kennedy School teaching and learning.
Our job at the Kennedy School is to prepare a new generation of leaders to fix the world in trouble.
The problems we face are more complex, more intricate, more involved, more global. So we have to think about different ways of teaching and learning.
We've known for a long time that people don't learn best when they're being talked to.
You get a lecture and you get a lot of information thrown at you at once, but it's not necessarily inculcated in your daily understanding of how to address a policy problem.
We now realize that there are much more effective ways of teaching and learning. One of the things we're doing is experimenting with the physical layout of the classroom.
When I first walked into the classroom, I think I was a little bit confused. We weren't passive students listening to someone in front of the class. We were engaging with each other because we were face to face.
There was a real flattening of the hierarchy. where instead of being, as they put it, the sage on the stage, I was kind of an orchestrator of student learning rather than the deliverer of knowledge.
Students are creating the class themselves, or part of fueling the material that's coming out of it.
Class time is the scarcest time at home.
So the professor can either spend a lot of time in class just talking to the students, or he can spend more time in class discussing with the students and being more interactive.
We've been experimenting with a flipped classroom where we deliver material outside of class and before class.
What we've done is create online modules.
Letting the students learn about the concept at their own pace.
And when they come to class, they come with that knowledge ready to work on hard problems.
As evidence accumulates about what works, it changes the whole school's conception of a good teaching. Somebody experiments with simulations, whether kind of traditional role-playing simulations or more novel game-based simulations, where people have to deal with a state of the world generated by a roll of the dice. And nobody knows what's going to happen.
While we're dealing with simulations or case studies or a video conference, we're engaged in real-world problem solving, but we're still in a classroom. We have to send our students out into the world to practice.
When you get on the ground, you really get to see these concepts come alive.
In the world, everything is messy.
It's real people with real problems, needing real solutions.
We've had so many moments where things didn't go as planned. And I think if everything goes as planned, it's because you're not adapting, you're not iterating, you're not taking signals from the place that you are in.
There is no one best way to engage in active learning.
We don't know the right answer yet.
We have so many ideas.
And we need to continue experimenting, evaluating what we're doing so that we can scale up future innovations.
It's really great to come to a place where there are people so concerned with the learning of the students.
The most important way in which we have an impact on the world is by improving what our students can do. Teaching right is actually the most powerful story.
It's giving me the most confidence that I can succeed at the business of government.
We're kind of out of time. So I would like to thank our panelists, Kahlil, Sarah, Molly, and Joe. Thank them for what they've said today. Thank them even more for what they've done, for how they've parlayed our investment into them into real changes in the world. Thank you very much. Oh, that is so great. Good morning. In fact, we have a chance to engage with these great folks. Can you give us more time? So, yes, sir.
I just have a comment. I think Joe should change his rule about not talking about himself.
I have long thought that. I have to, Joe, I've dealt with a lot of donors, but I don't think I've ever dealt with one quite like Joe, who has the idea himself for supporting an initiative, and then all he wants you to do is do the work with the money, and he doesn't want any attention whatsoever. And I'm just glad we tricked him into actually showing up and letting us show our appreciation a little bit for the way he has empowered us to do useful things in the classroom. Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, what Joe's doing, how is the case study how are we doing in terms of increasing numbers from 80 down to 17? Where are we now?
We're doing great, and I think we're doing well on the numbers, but we're also doing well on the nature of the cases. We have a Patricia who just produced this, an award-winning documentary filmmaker. We're now producing more multimedia and video cases. We're producing simulations. So we're doing terrifically, and Joe's support makes all the difference.
I should say, but they're good to keep me up to date on what they're doing, and they've invited me to come up here on 3 occasions to watch a new case being taught. And it's just amazing to see. I mean, I was here, I guess, the end of last year, a classroom with 70-some students from all over the world, and they're talking about solar energy, sun and drill. It's just a great case study that somebody wrote, and I've just been very pleased with what they're doing.
Yeah, there are actually several directions we're trying to go with teaching and learning at the Kennedy School, and how far and how fast we can go, and those actually depends a lot on the support of our friends. One of them is cases and curriculum, cases, simulations, multimedia programs, and we're well underway on that front. Another is field learning. That, in fact, as one of the students in the video talked about, getting on the ground, actually encountering things in the world is an important way of learning. We actually have been experimenting with different approaches to deploying people to work in the field, including one thing we're experimenting with is eventually one constraint on field learning is going to be not just money, but carbon. That we're going to, I think, be a little bit concerned about, sending the whole team, to Shanghai 15 times. So we're experimenting with maybe sending the whole team once to make those personal connections, and then telepresence for the rest of it. We're also experimenting with different ways of structuring learning in the classroom. More rooms like this, fewer rooms like traditional horseshoe-shaped classrooms. And one thing that's important to mention is, and this, I was glad that Molly mentioned the importance of evaluating each innovation before you move on. We are absolutely obsessive about evaluation. Every time we do something, we sort of assess it within an inch of its life. And what works, we expand. What doesn't work, we curtail and try something else. The SLATE initiative, which is where a lot of these things lives, has a very strong professional staff led by Carolyn Wood over there, and 3 kind of faculty, of whom I'm the only one who's not a statistician. The other 2, and I can pretend to be one on television and TV, but we are very committed to evidence and assessment, and each step we take is supported empirically. Just have some questions for these panelists, or some observations.
We need more resources, we need more money, we want to have these things happen in more classrooms, because it's a new experience for them to feel a little bit of that sort of ability to engage almost on a peer level with faculty just in the learning process. So that was actually very interesting to see how they all brought out that classroom.
It's a little bit heartening, but also a little bit embarrassing that we're just now being evidence-based, innovative, and intentional about our teaching, because we're sort of devoted to evidence in our research and our teaching. It's not so much the Kennedy School, but I think academia in general just sort of keeps turning the crank on the same old model. And we're trying to break that mold. We're trying to be more evidence-based and innovative in the way we teach, and it's paying off.
Jack, can you give us a sense of the mix of the students? Have they changed over time? Is that you and David King and others, are you thinking about that?
They are changing. I would say that the composition of the student body isn't radically different from your day, somewhat different. We were obviously, we've always been a heavily international school. I think we're becoming somewhat more so. The MPP program, which I chair, is I think now north of, it's almost 30% international, which is beyond where it used to be. One thing we haven't quite figured out yet is we're still way underrepresented in terms of Chinese students. And we haven't quite figured out how to get a big enough number of the right kind of Chinese students. In particular, in China, the tradition is you stay on, if you're on the elite educational track, you stay on that until you can't anymore. And that kind of conflicts with our desire to have people with some work experience. So we're trying very hard to figure out ways to get Chinese students with a couple of years of experience so they can actually process what we have to teach them. Yes, sir?
It was interesting on that exact point. The own School of Economics, which has a lot of overlapping policy in places here. President Kahlil basically said for the first time ever, the very national school obviously as well, American students have represented the largest minority, actually Chinese have done a very effective job. Either attracting them, whether the Chinese have found the LC very attractive. So they're now the single largest non-UK student group at the school. And I don't even know what they're doing different or what's different, but it's just kind of interesting because they had a huge step up in Chinese students, and they're going to be a comparable school to Chinese schools.
We can fill our classrooms with nothing but Chinese students if we wanted to. The problem is they all apply while they're still in college, and we don't want them when they're in college. We want them when they got some seasoning. It's Carolyn.
I was wondering if Alice could talk a little bit about how your experience in learning at community school compared with your experience either at the undergraduate level or kind of any other educational experience that you've had.
Actually, I might ask specifically Sarah and Joe to speak to that because they're both joint degree students, and I wonder how the Kennedy School was different from your other Harvard experience. Sarah, you want to start off?
The business school is entirely case method based. So when we were talking about case method earlier, and we've talked about it as something that's enlivened the course design here at the Kennedy School, the business school is entirely case method based. I think that there are advantages and disadvantages to the case method, right? And so I think something that the case method allows is you see a lot of different things, and so it kind of shrinks the unknown unknown, and so you have all of these heuristics and examples that you can draw on. I think it's very hard to learn cutting edge material through a case. And so if you want to be able to do both, you need to have multiple pedagogical styles to support it, right? So I was thinking about this and thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, but I think I learned so many things that were valuable to me from both schools, from the Kennedy School and the business school. But where I think I pushed my thinking and kind of was exposed to more kind of cutting edge ideas, and not just kind of ideas in an academic journal, but ideas that really reflected the world around me, was here at the Kennedy School. And so I value very different things about the school, about the two schools, but I think the pedagogical methods having multiple to accomplish multiple goals makes sense.
Joe, law school, Kennedy School?
Yeah, I can talk about that, but I think it's maybe not so true today, but I was in law school back in the old days, the paper chase days, and in my opinion, the teaching was terrible at the law school. The faculty was more interested in writing law review articles than they were teaching. Teaching was something they had to do, which is part of their job, but you could tell there was a few exceptions. Most of them you really didn't enjoy it. And believe it or not, it was in civil procedure, we had like 150 in the section first year, and older Professor Field, and sure enough, he'd call people that cite cases, and he called on a guy in the room who had not read the case, not prepared. So he kind of stumbled around and was trying to say it, and Field reached in his pocket, and he said, "Mr. So-and-so," he said, "you don't belong here." He said, "Here's a quarter, why don't you go tell your parents you're coming home?" And that literally happened. And that was just kind of the atmosphere. I think it's much different today because sometimes I'll come back for law school events and I'll sit in the classroom. It's much more, friendly, and students are interacting more. But in terms of the case study, I mean, in law school you read a case, but it's an opinion, and it talks about this thing or that thing. It's not at all like the case studies you do here, where it's a real life thing where people are moving, and just behavioral thing, not just an academic thing. So Kennedy School is much better.
One interesting thing about the Kennedy schools, we have, I think it's 23 different disciplines represented on the faculty, you know, from anthropology to divinity to, you know, computer science. Every single person on the faculty could be teaching somewhere else, and they're here because they want to teach students public service. And so I think that means almost by definition they're motivated to care about what the students do.
So I'll briefly juxtapose my undergrad graduate school. I went to Morehouse, which is a leadership school. Single sex, Martin Luther King graduated from there. When you learn leadership in that environment and you're coming of age as a very young person, being told that you're supposed to do stuff, the narrative is pretty fixed. It sort of comes out of the Gandhi, Nehru, Martin Luther King strain of leadership, and you understand in a liberal arts environment, you're adding all of these things that help you think about yourself in that context. But it's still too limited. What I was impressed by here, and it's both the mix of the students that you're with, the professors who come from several different disciplines, the opportunities to, you know, I did my social entrepreneurship in a class at HBS where half of the classes were Kennedy School. And it was an interesting tension because we were not prepared for the case study method as much as our colleagues in the business school, much to their frustration, and we thought they were too narrow. So, but what you had was a diversity here. You were comparing, you know, the experience of the Justice Department and Bobby Kennedy dealing with Little Rock Nine, with the emergence of Singapore, and you were actually making links between those two things, both in terms of understanding human capital, but understanding whether or not the great man, you know, the great woman theory actually holds. In my opinion, it doesn't, and it's really because of learning that you have the ability to actually analyze and master situations. You know, me in the balcony, it was amazing how nobody knew that phrase when they came here, and everybody said it at their graduation. I'm going to be in the balcony. You know, most of us struggled to find our way there, but those kinds of experiences and that diversity was for me definitely additive. I was a mid-career, and there hasn't been a day when I'm leading organizations of growing size and scale where I'm not using that diverse kind of way of thinking about problem solving.
I would just add two distinctions. I went to Notre Dame undergrad. The first year of the MPA program, which I'm sure will be backed up by my truth teller in the back, is incredibly integrated. Everyone has to take each required course together, so the whole MPID cohort takes every class together, and all the faculty knows exactly what we're learning in each other's classes. So sometimes the same example will be used, of a real-world example, so it's extraordinarily integrated, and it's a phenomenal learning environment. And the second thing I'd say is, particularly my second year when I took a lot of elective courses, the thing that massively stood out compared to my undergrad was instructors have done amazing real-world things. So I was the head teaching fellow for a course that Larry Summers and Len Pritchett taught together. That was a combined Kennedy School and undergrad course. And I will never forget, it was the single best lecture I've ever sat through, was Larry Summers diagnosing the financial crisis in Mexico from being there in all the conversations. And from the politics, the moment with Clinton where he had to make a big judgment call, to actually the sort of economics behind it. It was absolutely fascinating. And having Megan O'Sullivan talk about some of her experiences on the Iraq War. So that's a phenomenal thing for anyone who wants to work in public service, is to actually be taught from people who were there in the room for really important things.
I'm so glad that we actually got these last 15 minutes because I've learned a lot from you folks. I will share with my colleagues, Richard Zeckhauser, to Len Pritchett, to Dan Levy, to Megan O'Sullivan, your stories about what you learned in their classrooms. Be assured that all the things that you're referring to are things that we are trying to do bigger and better over the next few years. And I think that through including the signature course initiative that we have to improve what we're doing in the classroom, the field learning effort, as well as, we haven't talked too much about it, but pushing on digital learning on all different dimensions. We're going to be trying to raise our game to help you change your games. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of IDEASpHERE.